Okay. So just sending you the new link, Chris.
Can you WhatsApp it to me? So I'm posting this on another computer and I've got WhatsApp on that.
Can you just check that for me, Chris, if that's okay?
Yeah. That's looking promising.
Okay, we'll just start in a couple of minutes, people.
Okay, well, we'll see if that works. It's working at the moment. It seemed to be once we got up to 14 people, it froze, which is...
Well, it shouldn't happen, should it?
That's crazy, because you should be able to get thousands of simultaneous viewers.
Exactly.
Right, shall I spotlight Roy? And
does anybody know the link that you're now that Wendy's restarted it?
I've sent it out.
I've posted it on 2 groups. So,
Okay.
We posted it on Facebook.
yeah.
Okay.
If people check, they'll see it, and if not, they won't.
And I'm co-host if I want to share my screen, aren't I? Yeah.
Sorry, Roy?
I'm co-host if I want to share my screen.
Yes, definitely.
Well, I thought so. So tell me when you want to start.
Okay, we'll just give them 1 more minute to come in if that's okay with you. Okay, yes, they're all piling in. Okay, great. Welcome everyone. We'll be starting in just 1 minute. Okay, I'm just going to click record. And welcome everyone to the Astrological Association's 54th annual conference, and handing over to our president, Roy Gillett. Take it away, Roy.
Thank you everybody. Lovely to be here again, and amazing that we've managed to get this technological job working. Even in Stonehenge this morning wasn't easy, but we managed it. Those of you who were there as well. We hope to have something available for everybody later. We are working just online, but there's still the 4 tracks, as you know, and I want to talk a little bit about this conference and this year. So let's go to sharing my screen, which is on, bear with me. And we want to see, yeah, okay, from here. Okay, is that clear now? Can you see it okay?
Yep.
Yep. Okay, so where do we go from here? These titles for these talks are very, very carefully thought out by the board, well more than a year ahead of the conference when we're beginning the organisation. And I always find it's amazing that the board somehow manages to come up with an incredibly appropriate title. And who could imagine it would be so appropriate as it is now? Where do we go from here? So always at the beginning of our sessions, I like to feel the presence of far more people than are actually with us. You've probably heard me, those who come regularly every year, you've heard me say this before, but I just feel that because we've been doing this every year since 1969, all the thousands of people whose consciousness and commitment has been for astrology and understanding the world better through its use, are in some way in spirit with you. And so I like to sort of honour that, honour the past, honour our heritage, honour the shoulders we stand on, and also talk about those who have gone to another place in the last year. And I thought maybe it would be a nice way to start the conference is to just have a moment's silence to just focus on all that heritage that the AA has, that important heritage, and also remember those who've contributed so much to that heritage in one way or another and who have passed on this year. So can I just do that now, please? Astrological Association, thank you. Astrological Association conferences tend to occur at times of major global events. In September 1992, that seems a long time ago, it was 30 years ago, but it was 3 years after our conference at the Imperial College London, where in fact some of the best financial astrologers in the world were met together with others for our major conference, that the UK left the ERM, and that was the beginning of the road to Brexit, really, 30 years ago. And then in 1997, the Saturday of that year's conference was the day of the funeral of Princess Diana. And then in 2001, the Twin Towers attack occurred the day after that year's conference. In fact, some of you have heard me say that one of the guys who was speaking at the conference, Bob Mulligan, actually arrived in Boston the night before the bombers set off to bomb the Twin Towers. And then in 2008, Lehman Brothers collapse was immediately after that year's conference. And today, of course, we meet 4 days after the funeral of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, the world's longest serving head of state as an adult. And I think it's important to say that. We know that Louis XIV served a couple of years longer, but he was a little boy when he became enthroned. Our Queen was only 25 years old, an adult, and has served as an adult all those years. So indeed, we live in momentous times of change. And as always, the Astrological Association conferences are here every year to assist the understanding of these unifying forces of change and offer tools to help everyone on their way through. So ahead lie 2 years of radical adjustment as we come to the end of the Pluto in Capricorn structural regeneration and start years of Pluto in Aquarius regenerative knowledge and humanitarian system. It's very important to see the distinction between the two. An Earth period of Jupiter-Saturn conjunctions came to an end at the end of 2020, as we know, and yet we're still transitioning because the Pluto in Capricorn continues for another year or so. But when it does come in, it will be very much knowledge, everything. We always think that things are important for the last 200 years. They've been grossly important. Now, understanding, consciousness, even hopefully the humanitarian aspects of Aquarius will become dominant. And this image that was created for my book, The Secret Language of Astrology for Aquarius, to represent Aquarius, shows this pouring down of wisdom from the heavens. I always remind people, of course, that Aquarius is not the water carrier in a profound sense, is the character of wisdom, the carrier of wisdom, the distributor of understanding, of science, humanitarian, pouring down to regenerate. And here are the list of dates that Pluto moves backwards and forwards as it edges its way in and out of Capricorn. You can see that I've highlighted the 11th of October 2023. It's not certain yet, but maybe there'll be a conference around then. Seems a good time. And not exactly that date maybe, but around that time when Pluto moves direct, and this time moves direct to move into Aquarius ultimately and finally in 2024. So we will see how that goes, but generally you can see how this build up of transition, and obviously it's very confusing. As astrologers, we know that a time of radical new beginnings approaches, but also, as I was implying a moment ago, this transition will take time. First, we face a very difficult autumn as Saturn comes to within 7 minutes of arc of a Uranus square, and Jupiter returns to Pisces between the 28th of October and the 21st of December. We find that we've moved on, and yet from the problems we faced earlier, from the problems we have not moved on yet from the problems we faced earlier in the year. The autumn will have many consequent realities. You'll need to be at your astro best to understand and master them. The 2022 conference, this conference is ideally suited as a first step, gathering together talented new speakers with some of the world's most highly regarded astrologers and their many decades of experience. If you haven't already committed yourself to conference, do check their biographies and web pages. And even if you haven't been to their talks beside, do have a look at the website and find all they have to offer. And the transits this weekend are ideal. First of all, you've got the last 2 days of the waning Virgo lunar cycle. It's an ideal time to be clear about what we ourselves need for the days, months, and years ahead. To gather together, always it's preparing the garden for the new crop to be planted, or take that as a symbol of everything we do in our lives, preparing the garden of our new endeavors so that everything is in place for the sowing start in the early days of the new lunar cycle. And it also, Venus in Virgo is opposed to Neptune in Pisces on the 24th of September while this conference is happening. It broadens your understanding from some fascinating experiences. And Venus in Virgo trines Pluto at 6:46 on the 26th. Powerful possibilities come piling in. And Mars in Gemini trines Saturn in Aquarius on the 28th of September. And of course, obviously, as you build up towards that aspect, you'll see the build up of this stimulating knowledge coming from all sides. Assimilate it. You've got 28 days after the conference finishes to catch up on all the talks. So take full advantage of that. Be excited by the possibilities. As you discipline the flow of systematic understanding. So these days of the conference offer powerful energies to see, enjoy, and arm yourself with transforming knowledge. And last days of the old, as we said, last days of the old Virgo moon are ideally suited to sit back, take notes, absorb, learn, strength, and understanding. Build that strength wisely as the Libra moon month progresses awkwardly, and it will be an awkward month, with Jupiter retrograding in Aries into an unavoidably difficult Piscean autumn. Master the uncertainties of 2022. Be ready for fantastic change in the years that follow. And be sure that the Astrological Association Conference will be there to help us through sharing our knowledge and experience together. And with that kind of information and ideas and dedication, I'm going to stop sharing and open the conference in the usual way by lighting. And this time we are allowed to light, not to just use electronic lights as last year, though most of you may remember. May I now declare the Astrological Association of Great Annual Conference open. Thank you.
Thank you, Roy.
Yeah, so the way these conferences come together is the work of the board, but it couldn't happen without the coordination and the incredible conscientiousness of Wendy Stacey, our chair. And so with thanks for all that you've got together, Wendy, I'm passing over to you now to continue with the introductions and the next session. Thank you.
Thanks, Roy. Thank you very, very much. And again, welcome everyone. Lovely welcome. Thank you, Roy. And lots to think about. Just some very quick housekeeping things, really, just to take us up to the hour for Victor's talk. But just firstly to say that we will be having people muted. I'm just going to, sorry. We will be having people muted and cameras off during the talks. If anyone needs to ask questions, we can give permission. So do say something in the chat box if you need to unmute, or if indeed a speaker wants you to unmute. So just let us know and we can do that. Just a reminder, everyone, there is a coffee shop on your membership. So you can go into the coffee shop. It's open to 8:30 tonight. It's open now, but it's there for people to meet, for speakers who still have questions they want to answer, participants, and there's breakout rooms for people to chat. So if you want a private conversation between tutors, students, or whatever, but go in there. I mean, I think last year we had up to about 60 people at some time. So it was a lot of fun. So do visit that. There's also a special on your membership. You'll go into the website and you will see that there is PDF and audios there which you can purchase. It is for conference attendees only. So you can go in and purchase those, and you can keep the audios and the PDFs. They're yours to keep forever. So do make most of that offer while it's available. You will have recordings for 30 days, and we aim to get them ready for, I mean, one of them's already loaded now. So where you go onto the links to click onto the webinars, they will afterwards be replaced with a Vimeo link that will lead you into the recording, the video. So do remember to put the password in if it's requested, and you can view the recordings there. And I believe that Wanda Sellers' video, her workshop this morning, is already up there, so you can all view that now. But come Sunday, we will need a couple of days to catch up. So everything should be on board by Tuesday, but a lot earlier. That's really it from me. So now I really just want to I've got the honor of introducing Victor Oliver. And I've known Victor for many years now. He was a graduate with distinction from the Mayo School.
Wendy, don't forget to record.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much, Chris. Okay, I'm going to start again, and I'm going to say that I've got the great honor of introducing Victor Oliver. And like I said, I have known Victor for quite a few years now, and he is a graduate of the Mayo School with a very high distinction. But he has also been the journal editor for nearly over 8 years now for the Astrological Association, and what an incredible job that he does, and we're so grateful for his mastery in that. He's also got a book out this year called Chasing the Dragons, an Introduction to Draconic Astrology, which is published by Wessex Astrologer. It's a great book, highly recommend it. And he also has another one coming out later this year called Astrology, Secrets of the Signs and Planets, which is published by Flame Tree. So he is based near Brighton in West Sussex, and he's going to talk to us tonight about draconic astrology and synastry. So thank you, Victor, and over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Wendy. I'm going to share my screen, if I may. Hopefully, I'll enlarge the screen. Is that okay?
Yep, that's perfect.
Okay. Yes, thank you so much for that very generous introduction, Wendy. And we're talking about draconic synastry this evening. As you see, why I married my ultimate nightmare. This is going to be the fastest lecture you've ever heard. Time's against us. I'm not going to waste too much time with a lot of padding. Let's move on immediately. Yes. Oh gosh, it's that book. I'm sorry about this. I'm always advertising myself, but thank you, Wendy, for mentioning my book. And I'm not going to go through the rules of it. We're going to get cracking. Now, the thing about what is a nightmare relationship? Well, it's quite simple, really. It starts in love and lust and then evolves into war, or devolves into war. And that's it, basically. We don't have to be too clever about it. The idea came to me as I watched hours and hours of it, the defamation trial between Johnny Depp and Amber Heard. I want to emphasize very quickly that I'm not going to take sides in any of these pairings. I'm going to look at, if we've got time, I'm going to look at 3 pairs, actually. Depp Heard, then Oscar Wilde and Lord Alfred Douglas, otherwise known as Bosie, and then Princess Margaret and Lord Snowdon. But I have a feeling that I may not have time to go to the 3rd couple. Now, you'll be familiar with synastry, the comparing and contrasting of natal charts to establish whether a couple are likely to get on or not, whether they're compatible, that sort of thing. And just because there are struggles indicated in the synastry chart, squares and oppositions, that doesn't mean that the relationship can't work, but it does mean that it will require a lot of work, maybe. And I think we all know from experience that relationships usually require work. I've amazingly got into my mid-60s by avoiding nightmare relationships, and basically I can see them coming. I've got sort of paranormal antennae. So I think that partly qualifies me to talk about this subject, because I can see them coming, you know. You'll be familiar with synastry, maybe some of you less familiar with Draconic astrology. Now, I have to be honest and say that you're not going to learn about Draconic, the technique, today. The best that I can do is to indicate to you how it works in relation to the tropical chart. And rather than just spend time talking about the technique, I'll go through the cases and throw in some Draconic stuff. If the outcomes interest you, then I highly recommend that you learn the technique. It's very straightforward. The complication with it lies in interpretation and understanding that with the Draconic chart, you're actually dealing with a moon-based chart. And you erect it by moving the north node, which is the destiny point, and it's a lunar point. You move it from where it is in the natal chart to 0 degrees Aries. That's as much as I'm going to mention about the technique. You then shift the rest of the chart by the same number of degrees and minutes that exist between the natal north node and 0 degrees Aries. And there, in essence, you've got your Draconic chart. But that's where the work starts, because you're comparing a moon-based chart with the Draconic. And why are we doing this? Well, we're trying to find out, why did these 2 people get into this relationship? Why do we tend towards certain people that we then get stuck in a war with? What is it that we're trying to learn about ourselves? This may not be a conscious process. In fact, 99% of the time, it's not a conscious process. It is a spiritual, subconscious erring towards situations that will confront us. I mean, I was talking to Anna Isabel about this recently, and she calls them appointments with God or appointments with fate. It's as if something in our lives, we understand that there is dysfunction within ourselves, lack of balance. The fact that we get locked in some nightmare scenario may give rise to self-awareness. And what the Draconic synastry aims to do is to suggest what those themes may be that are thrown up within ourselves that we have to confront. Is it that we're power control freaks? Is it that we don't really fully commit? These are the sort of issues that arise. Now, let's start with Johnny Depp and Amber Heard. I don't think I have to say too much about it. It was live streamed peculiarly, I thought. Johnny Depp had asked for it to be live streamed. Amber Heard didn't want it, but there we go. And we were therefore open to an extraordinary series of revelations, from severed finger to strange objects found in the marital bed, we won't go there, to all sorts of other very strange and sometimes bizarre and shocking detail. In other words, it wasn't the happiest of relationships, and that's an understatement. It would be fair to say, I think we can say in all fairness, it was highly dysfunctional. But does that mean that it was a waste of time? Let's have a look. Now, with Draconic synastry, you start with the tropical chart. And I want to emphasize with Draconic, it's always starting with a tropical chart, because that's where you're going to get most of your information. We don't have time to fully delineate the charts. So just, if you like, sit back and kind of lap up some of the details that I'm chucking at you, because I'm trying to focus on the key details rather than immersing in micro-analysis. We're looking at Johnny Depp's tropical natal chart. We have an exact time for it, so we're pretty confident that he's Leo rising, and we find that the sun is ruling his chart in Gemini in the 11th house. I only use the equal house, but you can use any house you like. If you want to use whole signs, if you want to use Placidus, Regiomontana, it's up to you. But I find equal house works very nicely. And it's interesting that he's got Venus, Mercury and Taurus in the 10th house. I think that's quite telling. He's got quite a powerhouse in his first house with Pluto and Mars quite close. That's quite an interesting sort of area. It gives them a powerhouse determination, but it can hint at psychological issues that need to be dealt with. And we notice too, if you look at the bottom of the chart, just quickly, that strange object between Neptune and the IC is Black Moon Lilith. And I have noticed in highly dysfunctional relationships that this point, this lunar point, Black Moon Lilith, plays a very important part. It actually represents the furthest point the moon reaches in its orbit from Earth. That's what it represents. And it's associated with isolation, but also deeply buried, fairly dysfunctional energies at a primitive level, which need to be recognized and brought to the surface. And it tends to have a very angry energy. There's a whole mythology to it, and you can read about it. So I'm not going to examine the whole chart. The only last thing I want to say about Depp's chart is that North Node, you see in the 12th house, is in Cancer. This tells me that there are major challenges to do with the emotions, the psyche, with the moon-based sort of themes that we know about. So he's coming from a fairly structured default position in his character to challenges related to the emotional area, related it specifically to the psyche, and that's further emphasized by the 12th house. Some of you may think that he's already exploring that in his destiny through his work, but I think there's more to it than that. Let's have a look at Amber Heard's chart. Oh, I should say he's got a very fixed earthy chart, but I won't go on about that. Amber Heard's chart, we don't have a time for her, so you must ignore the houses, you must ignore the points. However, I'm quite the aesthete, and I like to look at a chart that looks like it. I don't like houseless charts, so you just have to use your imagination. Forget about Aries rising. We don't know whether Aries is rising. We just don't have the time. But we do know that she has her MC, her North Node rather, in Aries. That's quite interesting. There's Venus, her Venus is actually dignified in Taurus. So it's quite interesting when we look at the Draconic chart, what that reveals. The Draconic tends to rise up issues that need to be attended to. So you'll see in a minute what I mean about that. We see the South Node in Libra is conjunct the IC in the 7th. Well, it's not in the 7th, we don't actually know where it is. But anyway, we'll have to, unfortunately, we can't know where the nodal axis sits in the chart. But it's interesting to me that it actually is in the last minute of Aries. That's a little bit dodgy, isn't it? It could easily be in Taurus. So we can't be absolutely so, but Aries is certainly involved to some extent, even if it's on the cusp. And that gives rise, therefore, to assertion, to independence, and also taking full control of her life. That's, in a sense, the tropical interpretation of her North Node. Now, what we've done here is we're looking at the tropical. I'm just going to move. I can see myself on the screen. I'm just going to move myself. We're looking at the tropical synastry chart. We can see why they're drawn to each other. Notice that the Venuses are conjunct the Marses. Yes, the plural of Mars is Marses, in my opinion. The Marses are trine, the Uranus are trine. So we can see why they're drawn to each other, but the suns are semi-square. It's a minor aspect, but it's worth bearing in mind. His sun is opposed by her Saturn-Uranus, moons are square. His moon square her Mercury, her Venus square his Mars. In other words, we're seeing quite a few problems already. With the square, there are going to be issues, rows, arguments, or things to be resolved. It doesn't always mean that the relationship is doomed, but it does show up that there are relationship, in the alliance, there are going to be discordant energies. I should point out that the Johnny Depp chart is the inner wheel and Amber Heard's is the outer wheel. What are you looking? Do notice that her Pluto, this is quite interesting. The Pluto down here, we have to be careful about houses, but with Pluto, it's actually conjunct his Black Moon Lilith. And this is a very powerful indication that part of her role in relation to him is actually to profoundly challenge him. Now, that's not to grant approval to anything that we may have heard in the trial or any other trials that have taken place between them. But this is a very powerful indication of very deep, powerful energies. And of course, emphasized by the fact that it's in Scorpio. And so this will tend to dig into subconscious energies and drives and all sorts of different things. There's a lot else going on in this chart. I normally, when I'm doing a delineation, I do look at the moon phase as well. We notice, for example, that Dep's full moon is in the full moon phase. So it's quite an emotional, explosive sort of character. It's interesting to see that her sun is sitting on his MC as well. That's quite interesting. There's definitely a soul connection, but it's opposite all this energy down here, Pluto and so forth. So, I mean, so even if we didn't know what went on between them, we know that this is going to be quite a challenging relationship. What we're going to do next is that we're going to convert the tropical chart into a draconic chart. Now, I said it's about shifting the North Node from its natal position to 0 degrees Aries. I can't demonstrate that now, we haven't got the time. So just go with this, look to see the outcomes. And if you're interested in the outcomes, maybe you'll be interested in exploring it further for yourself. Now, what the draconic tends to do is that it tends to emphasize or bring to the fore themes that are touched on in the tropical, but elevates them as themes. It turns them into the headline news. So it's interesting to observe that Amber Heard's Venus now is demoted, in effect, from Taurus to Aries. And therefore, it's not in the best place. Venus doesn't like being in Aries because it throws up issues to do with independence and working jointly. That, in essence, is the problem. So this tells me, from a draconic perspective, that relationship issues are likely to be faced in her life. It's interesting that his Venus now is moved to Aquarius, which in a sense expands his base, but it also introduces issues to do with distancing. So we cannot say in the normal astrological sense that it's in detriment or fall, but what we could say is that it gives rise to issues of distancing and of separation between mind and heart. We're talking headline news, remember, we don't have time to microanalyze. There are other interesting things going on here. Her Venus is square his Black Moon Lilith via Neptune, which is positive by Mars and Sagittarius. This is dynamic, fiery, and confrontational. We can suppose, but we cannot say as a fact, but draconically we can suggest that her sole purpose in relation to him is to confront as a source of knowledge. It's not for us to judge the value of the confrontation or what gives rise, but there is a natural tendency here for her to confront. His Venus, as I've said, shifts to Aquarius. It squares the Saturns, which is difficult, I think. It means that there are going to be naturally imposed limits within this relationship, which have to be negotiated. Uranus is opposite in Taurus, and her Black Moon Lilith. Again, it's quite challenging. There's strong independence complicated by a powerful need to resolve discordant subconscious energies within the relationship. Just move my box again. Her Saturn rather is conjunct his part of fortune, Saturn in Scorpio. There's a powerful relationship issue here, I think, given oppositional energies. There are powerful wills focused on inner revolutions via confrontation. That word again, confrontation. Opposite is Mars, Uranus, Pluto, and her Draco Chiron. Notice also that her Uranus is conjunct his Chiron in Scorpio. Certainly it's going to be the case that she will bring a disruptive influence into his life. We'll look in a minute as to what he's doing in her life. We will examine that. But there does seem to be, she does seem to be the very proactive part of this partnership, if I can put it that way. With Uranus conjunct her Chiron, it's going to bring up issues of pain, the past, and of the need for healing. BML is involved as well, Black Moon Lilith. These mirrored aspects presents eruptive experience as a starting point to address psychological wounds from the past. It's almost as if, looking at this chart, we're seeing signs of dysfunction in both parties, and that they've come together in order, rather riskily, I think, to bring to the surface these hidden themes. Let's move on. Now, what we've done here, the inner wheel is Johnny Depp's tropical birth chart, and the outer wheel is Amber Heard's draconic. And what we're asking here is, what more specifically is she bringing to his life in terms of a soul purpose? What lessons can be learned? Notice immediately, and I'm almost ignoring my notes here, but Black Moon Lilith, again, that thing that wants to bring things out that are hidden, is sitting on his point, the midheaven. It's quite interesting that it's as if she's there to bring something out that needs to be confronted. And notice also that her draconic Black Moon Lilith is opposite his tropical Black Moon Lilith, which is very close to the IC, and also opposite her Saturn. That's very interesting indeed. The sole purpose here is, in a sense, to produce an inversion. It's almost to bring the innards out. You could say to some extent there's almost a literal truth if you followed the trial. But certainly in this instance, in both their cases, there seems to be a role to be played in setting off primordial energies which need to be addressed in either one. I'm not going to go delineating what those energies may be at this point. But Scorpio is involved here, Taurus is involved here, so we have stability versus instability. We have that which might be stable as against those forces which represent change, transformation, and hidden themes. As I say in my notes, volatile primordial energies in conflict, she is the wake-up call, no matter the rights and wrongs. She is a wake-up call for him. Whether she's gone about it correctly, whether he's responded correctly to it, that's another issue. But there's a wake-up call here. Saturn is almost midpoint with BML and Neptune, that's also relevant. Heard's draconic moon shifts to Virgo, conjunct his Virgo, Uranus, Mars, Pluto. This introduces themes of healing potential in this relationship, I think. Her moon is disposited by Mercury in Pisces. So there is, believe it or not, even a spiritual dimension to this. It may seem unlikely, yet this chart holds a positive theme as potential. You may say, you see, we can identify the draconic potential, but that doesn't mean that the potential is reached. That is why I say to you, these outcomes cannot be objectively certified, so to speak. We can only suggest them as a plausible way of rationalizing or understanding why the relationship happened in the first place. This chart examines Johnny Depp's draconic purpose in her life. Interestingly, his draconic midheaven is now sitting on all this Capricorn energy. That's very interesting indeed. So there's a raising of profile here. It involves all sorts of different energies. If we go by my notes here, Depp's Uranus, Mars, Pluto in Taurus opposes her Scorpio, Pluto, and is widely conjunct her dignified Venus. There's a high combustibility here that compels inner revolution through relationship. So he too has been put into her life to trigger some kind of revolution. His MC is conjunct Mars and Neptune in Capricorn. A collision of fantasy and reality is one way of putting it, especially with Neptune in Capricorn. Neptune is diffusive, is fantastical in its potential. Capricorn is the structure, is the reality. Somehow there is a need to find a compromise here. And it may very well be that he's a wake-up call to her. That's one way of looking at it. His Saturn is conjunct her Pluto. That's quite problematic. It brings in major control issues between them. It's over here in Scorpio, by the way, so that really does deepen that theme of control issues. It's almost as if both of them are quite willful, both controlling, if I can put it that way, without making any specific allegation. And so, but Pluto tends to act through fear, whereas Saturn is all about what is right, or what is relatively right. And so they have different versions of power, and they need to negotiate that power. In the end, I think they fell foul of their own draconic potential. I'm not sure that, but you never know what effect a relationship may have. Its effects may follow the life through in the years to follow. We cannot sit here and judge a relationship. We can only astrologically identify those energies that we find to be, shall we say, productive of growth. Let's put it like that. And since draconic is about the higher consciousness, we're also talking about the ideal consciousness. We're talking about the healthy consciousness potential. Notice too that his draconic Jupiter here is on her Uranus in Sagittarius. That's very interesting. So there is a very expansive potential here. And certainly for a while there was, I mean, she certainly grew through her association with him, but it was all very electric, and well, we know what happened. Really what's being said here is there's a need for hyper self-awareness, self-control. I don't think in the end they achieved that potential, but this is what the draconic synastry is suggesting. One legacy of this union may be greater awareness of control issues. No healthy relationship can develop if one party feels entitled at the cost to the other's independence. Now, we move to Oscar Wilde and Bosie. I don't think I need to say too much about them. They certainly were a notorious couple in the 1890s. The relationship really grew as Wilde's career blossomed. He had a fantastically successful time as a playwright from the late 1880s to around the mid-1890s, when he fell foul of the law. As we know, he ended up in jail for gross indecency related to a defamation case he brought against the Marquis of Queensberry, which failed, and then that attracted the attention of state prosecutors, who then charged him with gross indecency. At that time, homosexual acts at that time were illegal. Lord Alfred Douglas was a very spoiled, very capricious, volatile young man, locked in a war with his father. And unfortunately, that row with his father then locked Wilde into a war with the man. And one thing led to another. Now, I've not time to examine their natal charts, so I've gone straight to the tropical synastry. But note certain things. Wilde charts is very mutable. It's got some fair fixity. It's quite airy. Bosie's chart is certainly more cardinal in its tropical expression. Air is exceptionally high. And I won't say that this is always the case, but I have found that where air is extremely high, there can be empathy problems. It's almost as if he's so aware of his own desires and wants in his head that he's not thinking about other people. And I think that was a feature, certainly of his early life. But even when you follow him into his middle years, he was still a very volatile, capricious individual who could blow up at the slightest thing. And that was part of the problem between him and Wilde. It's interesting, I talked about Black Moon Lilith. Notice that, by the way, we do have time for both of them. And just to clarify, the inner wheel is Oscar Wilde's natal chart. I'm not so sure about his Virgo rising, but we'll have to live with it. He doesn't strike me as a Virgo rising, but we'll go with what is on the Rodden rating for it. And the outer wheel is Lord Alfred Douglas's tropical natal chart. Note, I said to you, Black Moon Lilith tends to arise in significant places. So we notice immediately that Douglas's Black Moon Lilith and Pluto are sitting on the North Node in Wilde's chart. That's quite a destabilizing aspect, intra-aspect. It really does. You know, it's interesting that Wilde wrote his long letter, De Profundis, which means from the depths. Well, from the depths could be a literary version of Pluto and also elements of Black Moon Lilith. It's almost as if it is the part of Alfred Douglas to stir something in his heart or stir something in his soul. And of course, it's opposed by Scorpio energies opposite in the third. What else do I want to notice? Of course, we can see why they were drawn to each other. The two suns down here are quite conjunct in Libra. They were both Librans. You could say about Bosie that he's got a sort of scorpionic element to it. He's on the cusp there, very close to Scorpio. The Marses are out of sign square to each other. Wilde's Jupiter is widely square Bosie's Sun. Bosie's Jupiter is trine Wilde's Sun. In other words, we're talking about excess here, and a feature of their relationship was lots of expensive restaurants, lots of expensive hotels, but also indiscretion. At times together, they seemed to be unaware of the consequences of public displays of affection and so forth, or they're being seen together. This is not a moral judgment, it's just that we have to understand the times. It was a time when homosexuality was widely regarded as a taboo and was illegal. And it's illustrated in the chart only in terms of the risks of excess. Let's look at the draconic version of the chart. Here it's interesting, notice that the two moons over in the 11th are conjunct in Gemini. So there definitely was a meeting of minds and hearts. There's no question about that. Though in Gemini, it may have had a capricious quality, and certainly one can't say that they married. What you could say is that their association endured over time, but they spent relatively brief times together. What else have we got? Bosie's disruptive Uranus is now on Wilde's MC and Saturn. That to me, and that's at the top of the chart, this tells me that it is the part of Alfred Douglas to be the awakener in Wilde's life and to take him on a new journey, which is in Aries. It's very easy in retrospect to say, oh, but it led to disaster and ruin. Well, sometimes we have to experience certain very fundamental and very risky experiences in order to be true to ourselves. And it may be, and it has been argued, that Bosie triggered certain creative energies in Oscar Wilde, while also triggering other energies that weren't so helpful. Notice that this energy is opposed by all this Libra energy in Wilde's chart. There's a need for moderation, which I don't think was really achieved. Notice too that the Jupiter ascendant of Bosie is also sitting on Uranus and Pluto. So this is a very, very eruptive and enlightening relationship. We can't judge it on how things turned out. We have to judge the spiritual character of the relationship. Just to look at my notes, Bosie's Pluto BML is taken to the 7th house. Yeah, okay, well, that's interesting. Wilde's Pluto in Pisces opposes Bosie's Saturn in Virgo. Major power themes here, suggestion of intimacy challenges in relationship. Again, it's about power. We saw a variation of that in the Depp-Heard thing. Saturn and Pluto opposing or in a synastry conjunction is quite common, usually with BML quite close. Just to read my notes on the right-hand side, I'm constantly moving my box around. Just forgive me for a moment. Draconically, Bosie opens up a new world to Wilde, Uranus in Aries on MC, but faces opposition from Mars on Wilde's IC. Note also Bosie's Mars on his IC too in the 10th house. We have a kind of mirror sort of thing going on there with the Mars and IC association. And notice that it is a feature of their draconic relationship that their families actually in life fought to the end the bond. Marquis of Queensberry fought against it, dragged Wilde to court. And in the case of Wilde's family, they tried to end the relationship through financial challenges and so forth, but nothing could break them apart. Bose's Jupiter is on Wilde's Pluto in Pisces. That's an inspirational theme. But Pisces can be self-martyring. Remember that. The bond deepened Wilde's faith, but through loss. Later in life, Bosie too embraced Christian faith. I do think that there was a spiritually enlightening perspective. There's quite a lot of Pisces energy here if you look at the eighth house, the transformative area. It's interesting that Wilde wrote that wonderful essay, The Soul of Socialism, or something like that. It's gone out of my head what it was. But also in his letter, De Profundis, which he wrote to Bosie from jail, he addresses the Christian message. So it's very interesting how both veered towards Christianity at certain points in their life through their various challenges. Wilde's draconic chart is more cardinal. In other words, he's being encouraged in his higher self to take control, to be more honest with himself. And Bosie's chart is a lot more watery. So for him, there was a challenge to develop empathy, to develop a greater sense of the reality of other people. Very briefly here, we're looking at Wilde's draconic effect on Lord Alfred Douglas. So the inner wheel is the tropical chart of Bosie. The outer wheel is the draconic chart of Wilde. It's interesting that Wilde's draconic north node is taking in Chiron now, and also the moon, obviously the south node right at the bottom. This is taking in issues within Lord Alfred Douglas. I would suggest one way of interpreting that aspect is releasing him from family restriction. That's how I would interpret that. He's bringing in a new energy. I mean, the family was already dysfunctional, the Queensberrys, but it is the destiny point here causing Bosie to address issues within the self, the harm that's been done through the family and so forth. I mean, taking him in a direction which is entirely new in Aries. I think too that he brought emotional reality to Bosie's world. Notice that Wilde's moon is on Bosie's Jupiter in Gemini. Bosie's Saturn in Sagittarius is opposite, isolating and possibly censuring. I'm noticing this here. If you look at Bosie's draconic moon, it's on, Oscar Wilde's draconic moon is on Jupiter, which is in itself very encouraging, but there is the Saturn opposition. So there are limits here, restrictions. And do remember that part of the problem was that Bosie brought his father into their relationship through constantly sort of teasing his father in a way with it. You know, it's almost like he was challenging his father to do something about it. I would say, looking at this chart, that Wilde was there to challenge Bosie's certain ingrained assumptions about life, perhaps. Wilde's Mars in the fourth is on Bosie's Mercury, Venus, Moon in Libra. Note the two suns are exactly sextile, which I think points to a fated bond of some sort. Wilde's north node takes in, as we've noticed, Bosie's Chiron opposite Bosie's moon, another indicator of departure from family or restriction. In this chart, we're looking at Oscar Wilde's tropical chart, the inner wheel, and the outer is the draconic of Bosie. Notice that Bosie's sun is now it's reasonably conjunct Oscar Wilde's black moon Lilith. So once again, we have this need to bring to the surface. And remember, although Bosie didn't introduce Wilde to homosexuality, but certainly he gave it its full flourishing as a love. It's interesting too to notice that Bosie's Mars is now sitting on Uranus, and that's a pretty volatile combination. It's also opposed by Wilde's Mercury, which takes in Bosie's MC. So these are highly challenging aspects. Again, like the Depp Heard, there's almost this need to break things up. It's almost as if it's a creative act to do it. But of course, there will be societal consequences. There's not time to go, you're probably seeing a lot of things. You'll be able to look at this video and then you can study it more for yourself. But certainly the bond inspires the imagination, but faces limits from the outer world. Struggle and pain seem to be the key to enlargement of spirit. And notice over near the descendant point, Bose's Jupiter is sitting on Wild's Neptune. That's very interesting. This is a very inspirational aspect, but once again, we have the Saturn opposition. So we're up against restrictions, and that is part of their lot of having to deal with limitations and restrictions. We have got a little time just to rush through the third couple. I didn't think we'd get to this point. It's only because I'm speaking as a Gemini very fast. They got married in 1960. It was from the get-go pretty disastrous. She soon got very bored with him and started having extramarital affairs, and he probably was playing away too. Just very quickly about her chart, it's highly cardinal, it's quite willful. She has Aries rising, Uranus rising opposite Venus. So I think we can see problematic there. She's going to be very erratic in relationships. It's going to be pretty electric, but unfortunately, if you don't find some midway between those two energies, then there's going to be a lot of instability. And I think that we can all agree that that is one way of looking at it. Yet that is a nice Venus in Libra. That's a very nice Libra. The Sun is dissociate conjunct Neptune. That's interesting. She was known to be quite addictive through smoking and cigarettes and one thing and another, but also to status. And we'll look at that in a moment. In her draconic chart, which I'm not going to examine, cardinality is missing. So that tells me that her higher soul part is asking her to be less willful, to be more flexible in her approach to life, because mutability is very high in the draconic chart. We don't have time to show it, take my word for it, and you can look it up for yourself. Setting up a draconic chart is the simplest thing in the world. All the software programs have draconic option under chart or zodiac, okay? Whether it's Astro.com, SolarFire, Astro Gold. This is he was originally called Anthony Armstrong Jones. He was a very famous photographer. He then became Lord Snowdon on marriage to the Queen's sister. Highly mutable chart, quite different from Princess Margaret. It's a locomotive, which makes Saturn as the lead planet up in the 11th there. Very, very powerful. So he's got a very ambitious side to him. He's very determined. Neptune is setting, which is appropriate. He was a photographer. North Node has stability themes. In his draconic chart, cardinality is more emphasized. So he's being encouraged in his higher self to take full control of his life and to assert his reality. And there's the problem. There's the problem in relation to the union between him and Princess Margaret. What we've got here then is the tropical synastry. The outer planet, look at North Node, look at Princess Margaret's BML, Black Moon Lilith on Mars. Wow, that's explosive. Once again, we have this energy that causes the inclination to bring up the primordial energies. Both have Uranus rising. Well, that's a generational thing, but in the rising sense in this, it does point to problems to do with independence. And they were fighting each other constantly about freedom and one thing and another. Her fire, Sun, Earth, Neptune square, his air. This is very interesting here, down here in the 5th house. Although we're talking about generational outers, but the fact that they're close to her Sun and his descendant does, I think, bring in themes to do with fantasy. And her Black Moon Lilith is in the 11th conjunct his Mars and Mercury in Aquarius. Relationship will be intense, highly sexual, marked by jealousy or drama, as was the case. Her air Venus is square his Earth Saturn. That's problematic. His water Venus in 12th square her air Mars. You know, the usual signs of problems in a relationship. This is a highly combustible union, setting the challenge of surviving reality checks and of restraint. Notice if we're going back to all this Virgo and that Leo Sun of hers there, opposed by some energy over here, including Black Moon Lilith. Here we're looking at the draconic synastry now. So we've converted both tropical charts into draconic versions. Notice now that her Black Moon Lilith is closer to the ascendant point. The shift has personalized it. There is something about his persona or his person that is challenging her fixation with status. It was well known that she clung very much to the baubles of her status. You know, she had to have her vodka and the orange in the morning for breakfast, for the hair of the dog. When she could have married Peter Townsend at some point, and when the Queen said, yeah, you can marry him, but you know, you're going to have to give up your title, you're going to have to live abroad, you won't be on the civil list anymore, you won't get any public money. She said, oh, I'm not doing that. So all her life, she was more royal than the Queen. And I'm wondering whether this association between his ascendant and her Black Moon Lilith is an attempt to disrupt that, because it's sitting opposite all this Neptunian energy now in royal Leo. You see, I know Cancer's involved too, but it's interesting, isn't it? It's all a little bit wide, but I'll allow it. I'm coming towards the end of this talk now, so I can't go into all the things that I wanted to say. But what I will say about this from a draconic point of view is that one potential purpose of this union is to find independence within it, or to unlearn the self-defeating habit of entering a bond for status or other materialistic reason. If we think about her Neptune shifting to Cancer, sign of emotional responsibility, his Neptune is in proximity, raises the risk of illusory feeling. She started with the fantasy about him, which soon fell away. Another reality about Lord Snowdon is that he was bisexual. So not only did he have relationships with women, but also with men. And that's established. I mean, it's not rumors, it's well known. The overall sole purpose of this relationship is to find emotional authenticity and to understand the damaging power of fantasy or addictive behavior. Remember, Neptune covers in a number of different things. This union raises the risk of addictive behaviors if emotional problems are not faced as realities. Now, I'm coming up towards the end. There was a bit more to be said about their two charts, but I don't know, Wendy, whether you want me to stop.
You still can take another minute or two if you need to, Victor.
Very quickly then, this chart we're looking at is Princess Margaret's tropical inner wheel as against Lord Snowdon's draconic. So what role is he playing? Interestingly, we now have Venus sitting on her Black Moon Lilith. So it's identifying relationship as being the means to, in a sense, releasing her from her various fixations about status. I know it slipped into Aquarius, which is a liberating sign, relatively speaking, in relation to her Capricorn energy in the tropical. There's a lot more to be said, but notice also that his Black Moon Lilith sitting on her, look at all that, Saturn, MC and Capricorn. He's there to, I mean, I know it's out of sign, but he's there to disrupt her world. In the end, he didn't break her addictions. I don't think she learned anything from the relationship other than to avoid photographers. If we look at what effect she had on his life, I think it's more materialistic. Her Saturn is sitting on his part of fortune in Sagittarius. She elevated him, his status and so forth. We can see down here that he took her in a new direction, but it was a nebulous one in Pisces on her sun. There's a lot more that I could say about this. It's interesting too over here on the setting side that her draconic Mercury is sitting on his Neptune, and she was pretty inspirational of his work. She opened up his world. There's no question about it. I also noticed that her IC is sitting on his moon, and but it's also up against, up against MC and Saturn. So we can see here the limitations and the restrictions. But I personally think that this is a much more materialistic chart in relation to lifting him. And I think he was a much more solid figure than she was. And that's not a moral judgment, it's just looking at their draconics. And that said, I'm sorry it's been a bit fast. I'm sure you're sort of dizzy with it all and you're probably thinking, gosh, he's jumped a few hurdles there. But I hope that you have heard enough to be interested in approaching draconic and adding draconic to your toolkit. And thank you.
Thank you, Victor. That was wonderful. I love that pace. I think it's great. That was
Thank you very much.
It was fabulous. Thank you so much.
Okay. Shall I stop sharing?
Yes, please. And now we're just going to take a break, and we'll come back just before 7. And Roy will be introducing Angela Cornish. And don't go away after that. We have the Charles Harvey Award for exceptional service to astrology. And we have 3 outstanding nominees, wonderful people from our community who will be honoured. So please do stay after Angela's talk. And so we shall take a break and see you here just before 7 o'clock. Thanks, everybody. See you soon. Welcome back, everybody. Hi, Angela.
Hi, Wendy.
Okay, I'm just waiting for Roy. You there, Roy?
Yeah,
There he is.
yeah, I'm just coming back. Right, here we go.
So welcome, everyone. I'm now handing over to Roy Gillett. So thank you, everyone. And just a reminder of the Charles Harvey Award after Angela's talk. Thanks, guys. Oh, hold on. Let me just click record.
I want to introduce the Carter Memorial talk, first of all. And so a lot of you will have heard me say this from years, or heard Charles Harvey himself saying about Charles Carter's the Carter Memorial Lecture. Sorry, I lost my head. I'll start again. This is to introduce the Carter Memorial Lecture, which we hold every year in memory of Charles Carter, who was a major figure in the establishment of astrology in its many forms through the early to middle part of the 20th century into the latter years as well. When he died in 1969, it was decided by both the Lodge of London, the Astrological Lodge of London, and the Astrological Association to honour his memory every year by asking a leading member of the astrological community to give a talk on a particular subject that they felt they wanted to express to the community. And the list of names of people who've given this talk is incredible. And it's considered to be a great honour to be asked to do it, and a great privilege to listen to the words of an experienced and wise astrologer. So much so that there's a tradition, not so important probably on the virtual situation that we're in at the moment, but certainly at conference, that the talk will be heard and there will be no questions at the end. And then there's always the joke that maybe a drink will be bought for the speaker at the end. We'll have to leave that until maybe next year. This year, I'm pleased to say that it's the turn of the Astrological Association. Next year it will be the Lodge to select the speaker, and we've chosen Angela Cornish. Now, Angela, I first remember when I first became more involved with the Astrological Association at the end of the 1980s and in the beginning of the 1990s. Angela was the key figure in the organisation of the building that was purchased by the Urania Trust and served as an astrology centre for several years, and is still the financial foundation, the building sold, but the financial foundation of the benefits the Urania Trust can give to various activities in the astrological community. Over the years, Angela's been involved in teaching and supporting astrology. She is now a major member of our astrological community and our Astrological Association as secretary of the association. And so it's a great privilege for me to be able to recommend this Carter Memorial Lecture and to ask Angela Cornish to deliver it. Thank you, Angela.
Well, thank you, Roy, and thank you everyone for logging in tonight. Just let me share my screen. Oh. Just 1 second. Right, it's my absolute honour to give the Carter Memorial talk this year. Although I have to say, when I was asked to give the talk, my first reaction was whether I'd be able to do it justice. But when I looked at the chart of the time that I was asked, and it had my exact ascendant and midheaven, it seemed it was meant to be. Anyway, to start with, I'd like to dedicate this talk to all the late and great astrologers that have preceded us, together with my personal mentors, the people that have influenced my astrology over the years. Unfortunately, too many to mention specifically by name. What came next, of course, is the very worrying stage of thinking what I'm going to talk about. So I thought I'd start with Charles Carter himself, to whom this talk is commemorated every year, and see where that led me. He was born in Parkston, Dorset, on the 31st of January, 1887, at 10:55 p.m. Charles Ernest Owen Carter, known as Owen to his friends, was an eminent English astrologer. He was born into a wealthy and well-respected family, his grandfather having established a thriving brick and tile empire, which survives today as Poole Pottery. As a young man, he graduated from the University of London and trained as a barrister. And he then served in the army for 4 years during World War I. His interest in astrology was kindled when he wrote away for one of Alan Leo's shilling reports. And in 1922, Carter became president of the Astrological Lodge of London, which had been founded by Alan Leo in 1915. And Carter edited its quarterly magazine for over 30 years. The lodge blossomed at this time. Astrological lectures and training courses were held, and correspondence was built up across the world. In 1948, the lodge sponsored Carter's idea of creating the Faculty of Astrological Studies, a body intended to set standards of astrological excellence, and of course, it's still a leading body today. Carter was its first principal and became Principal Emeritus on his retirement in 1954. In 1958, our very own Astrological Association was founded by an elite group of astrologers from the lodge. They met in a pub, I believe, and formed the association. The two most prominent members were John Addy and Brigadier Roy Firebrace, together with Charles Carter, and many other leading astrologers of the day, including Joan Rogers, Margaret Hone, and Ingrid Lind. Carter was a researcher and a prolific writer of articles, essays, and books, which proved to be extremely popular, and most of which are still in print and available to students now. So what stands out immediately from Carter's chart are the Saturn and Uranus on the angles. Uranus giving eccentricity and Saturn responsibility. Plus, he had the Sun-Mercury conjunction, a close square between Neptune here and Venus, the opposition of the Moon to Jupiter, which itself was square to Mercury, and Pluto square to Mars. So he must have been quite a character. Although I'm not going to dwell on his chart, I was intrigued by the fact that he died in 1968, having forecast that he would die that year. And from 1970 onwards, he's been honoured each year at the AA conference by the annual Carter Memorial Lecture. Now, I've probably got you wondering how he predicted his own death. So here is his progress chart for 4th of October 1968. The inner chart is his natal chart. You can see here with Saturn and Uranus on the angles. And the progressed chart is round the outside. I don't know if you can see the top of this chart, but I can't. It's got this bar is in front of it. I don't know if I can move it, maybe. But anyway, in 1968, you'll notice that the midheaven, which started off here at 20 Cancer, has now moved to here, 12 Libra, conjunct his Uranus. And it's approaching the ascendant as well. It's often said that nothing important comes to pass in the life unless there is a direction or a progression involving an angle of the chart. In other words, the ascendant or the midheaven. In this case, the progression involves the midheaven to Uranus, which can herald sudden and unexpected events, and is also so close to the ascendant that it could have indicated potential danger to his physical body. Also, you'll notice there's a progressed new moon. It would have happened 3 months before his death in July, but it was certainly 1968. The progressed moon is really important because it only happens every 32 years or so. The progressed sun moves approximately 1 degree by progression per year, whereas the progressed moon moves approximately 1 degree per month. So it takes about 32 years for them to come together again. So it places a really strong emphasis on a particular area of the chart. And it's one of the most important times in our lives, as it signals both the beginning and the end of a cycle. In this case, you can see that Mars is also involved and may well have had an impact on Carter's health. I then looked at his transits. Has that gone? For some reason, my
We can still see it, Ange.
I know, I'm trying to move down to the next slide, but it's not going. I don't know why that is. I know Mercury's retrograde, but this is ridiculous.
Are you using the arrow keys to move?
Yeah, the 4 arrow keys at the bottom of your
You
keyboard on
can
the
try
right.
the down arrow. Sometimes that
that's-
works and another thing when something else doesn't.
Down or right, yeah.
That's it, got it.
There we go.
I think that was it. Yes, okay, thank you. I don't know why, I think it's just my computer being temperamental. Anyway, these are the transits for the day of his death, and you can see immediately that the transiting sun has come to that 12 degrees of Libra, triggering that midheaven progression to Uranus. In addition, both Saturn and the North Node have both been transiting his descendant and at the same time opposing that Uranus. Saturn in March and April 1968, and the North Node in June and July. So these would have been possible triggers for that progression that year. Apart from this, you'll see that transiting Neptune here is opposing its own place and squaring the natal Venus, which mirrors the natal aspect. Venus, of course, is Carter's 8th house ruler. So for Carter, looking ahead to his own death, I think he would have been looking at the progressions first. And then because there was this major configuration of midheaven to Uranus, together with the progressed new moon conjunct Mars, he would have been on the lookout for transits that would trigger those progressions. He would have seen that Saturn and the North Node going across his descendant. And he would have also, I'm sure, noticed when these inner planets triggered this sensitive point. In addition, there was this Neptune squaring his 8th house ruler, Venus. So all in all, in the light of such strong progressions and transits, I'm not surprised that he predicted his own death that year. He was 81. However, we've digressed from his natal chart, and what was interesting to me was that when the AA was formed in 1958, Pluto was just entering Virgo. Again, I can't see this top of the chart here because the toolbar is above it, and I had to get rid of that. But I don't know if you can see it.
No, we can't see the toolbar. You can pick it up by just putting the mouse on it, grabbing it. and moving
Yeah, I'm
it.
trying to do that, but it doesn't seem to be moving.
Yeah, we're all right though, Angela.
Okay.
Yeah, we can see
Remember
it.
the
fine.
That's
Okay.
fine. So Pluto was just entering Virgo, and he sits on the 0 degrees of Virgo, and at the same time making an exact opposition to Carter's Mars at 0 degrees of Pisces. So Carter had Pluto square Mars natally, and when the AA was started, of which he was a founder member, transiting Pluto was exactly opposite his Mars at 0 degrees Pisces, which must have been a very ambitious and successful time in his life. However, it was of even more interest to me that the AA was formed when Pluto was on the threshold of a new era as it entered into Virgo. As you know, we ourselves are on the threshold of Pluto's ingress into Aquarius, which takes place on the 24th of March next year, 2023, and where it will stay for 20 years until 2043. I do realise that it does go backwards and forwards, back into Capricorn and into Aquarius for a while, but essentially it's 20 years until 2043. And like most astrologers, I guess, I've been thinking about what this might herald. So we're leaving behind Pluto in Capricorn, where Pluto's been since 2008, and where we've seen the structures of our lives, such as government, businesses, and institutions, come under scrutiny and corrupt systems exposed. And of course, the recent demise of our sovereign, Queen Elizabeth II, who was the epitome of duty and responsibility, is also symbolic of the end of that era. So before we look at Pluto in Aquarius, let's first take a look at Pluto itself. Pluto was discovered at the Lowell Observatory on the 18th of March 1930 by Clyde Tombaugh, who was an amateur astronomer from Kansas, who was hired by the observatory specifically to photograph the sky with a special camera and search for a hypothetical planet predicted from the calculations of the observatory's founder, Percival Lowell, who'd actually died 14 years earlier. Oh, I've got the same problem again. It's that my slide's not going down. Is there another way to get onto the next slide?
It's not working with the arrow keys.
It's not, no. I don't know why it suddenly decided not to.
Is there a way of changing the pointer? I sometimes find that having that rather lovely looking pointer does actually doesn't always help. I don't know if that would help, but if that will do it. Or you could just try clicking on the screen. That sometimes makes it move.
Right, okay.
Good.
Thank you. Pluto was named by an 11-year-old girl, Venetia Burney, from Oxford, England. In 1930, when the discovery was announced, she suggested over breakfast to her mother and grandfather that the new planet be named Pluto for the Roman god of the underworld. Her grandfather forwarded the name to Professor Herbert Turner, who was the astronomer royal at the time. He cabled the Lowell Observatory and the name was selected. Venetia received £5, which I believe is about £300 in today's money. Pluto is the name of the Roman god of the underworld, equivalent to the Greek god Hades. There are two glyphs in use for Pluto. The first shows the circle of spirit, that divine life force where there is no beginning and no end. And this is cradled in the crescent of soul, which is the non-material part of the personality, laying on top of the cross of matter, which represents the physical form and our three-dimensional world. The symbol shows the soul's mastery of the material world and the transformation of body and soul into spirit. There is, of course, another glyph in popular use for Pluto, which is a combination of the P and the L for Percival Lowell. Pluto orbits the Sun in 248 years, spending roughly 20 years in each sign. Sometimes its orbit comes within that of Neptune, but its average distance from the Sun is 5,900 million kilometers. It's to be found in the Kuiper Belt and is made up mostly of ice and rock. It's by far the smallest planet, being smaller even than our moon. In 2006, sadly, it was reclassified as a dwarf planet because other planetary objects of similar size were found in the Kuiper Belt. However, as a result of this decision, there was public outrage. And after years of deliberation, on the 1st of April 2017, the International Astronomical Union announced that it had again reclassified Pluto as a major planet. This is the chart of the discovery of Pluto. It's quite an interesting chart, and with the exact Venus opposite Neptune, it must have been quite a euphoric moment. And also, as Neptune is significator of photography, it's no surprise that this figure's large at the time of its discovery. As you can see, Pluto is in the 12th house, the unconscious, and Mercury and Mars are in the 7th house, conjunct, representing one-to-one relationships and therapy. Although there's no direct aspect configuration between these planets, it's interesting that Pluto's discovery is generally considered to have coincided with the emergence of the talking cure in psychiatric treatment, which focuses on bringing repressed content to consciousness through talking. As I've already mentioned, Pluto is synonymous with the Greek god Hades, god of the underworld. In Greek mythology, Hades was the firstborn son of the Titans, Cronus and Rhea. He had 3 older sisters, Hestia, Demeter, and Hera, as well as 2 younger brothers, Poseidon and Zeus. All of them, except Zeus, had been swallowed whole by their father as soon as they were born. But once he had grown up, Zeus used an emetic given to him by Gaia to force Kronos to disgorge the children in his stomach. Hades and his brothers, Zeus and Poseidon, then defeated their father's generation of gods, the Titans, and claimed rulership over the cosmos. They drew lots for the realms to rule. Zeus received the sky, Poseidon the sea, and Hades received the underworld, that unseen realm to which the souls of the dead go upon leaving the world, as well as any and all things under the earth. In artistic depictions, Hades is typically portrayed holding a bident and wearing his helm of invisibility, with Cerberus, the three-headed guard dog of the underworld, standing to his side. The deceased entered the underworld by crossing the river Styx, ferried across by Charon, who charged an obolus, which was a small coin for passage, placed in the mouth of the deceased by their relatives. The far side of the river was guarded by Cerberus, passing beyond whom the departed entered the land of the dead to be judged. Hades was not, however, an evil god, for although he was stern, cruel, and unpitying, he was still just. Hades ruled the underworld and was therefore most often associated with death and feared by men, but he was not death itself. Around the 5th century BC, the Greeks started referring to Hades as Pluton, with the root meaning wealthy, considering that from the soil came riches, for example, fertile crops and metals. Pluton became the god who both rules the underworld and distributed riches from below. When Hades emerged in the daylight, he wore a helmet, which made him invisible to mortals. And of course, we meet Hades in that other story where he abducts Persephone. Persephone was the daughter of Zeus and Demeter. She was actually Hades' niece, but this didn't stop him from abducting her from the land of the living, taking her down into the underworld. According to tradition, Persephone was said to have been pulling a narcissus flower out of the earth when Hades appeared from the small hole underneath where the flower had been and carried her off. Demeter, the goddess of grain, was extremely devoted to her daughter, and the two had been constant companions. Zeus, however, decided that Persephone's time as a young maiden, who spent all her time with her mother, would come to an end, and he arranged her marriage to Hades. When Persephone disappeared, Demeter was sure something terrible had happened to her and began searching the world over for her missing daughter. She wandered from place to place, looking for her and neglecting her duties to make grain grow as she did. She eventually returned to Olympus and demanded that her daughter be returned. If she was not, Demeter threatened to cause devastating famines. Zeus then commanded Hades to bring Persephone back to the surface. Hades put Persephone in his chariot and began the journey out of the underworld. But as they travelled, she ate some of the pomegranate that he offered her. When they came to the surface, Demeter was overjoyed at her daughter's return. But this happiness would be short-lived. Because she'd eaten food from the underworld, Persephone was forever bound to that place. It would be impossible for her to return to the world of the living for good. A compromise had to be reached to pacify Demeter and maintain the marriage between Hades and Persephone. The young goddess would live with her mother most of the time, but return to her husband and his realm for 1/3 of the year. So when Persephone was with her mother, Demeter rejoiced. Grains and other plants grew and flourished. When she returned to the underworld, however, Demeter fell into mourning. For 3 months of the year, the winter, nothing would grow and the land would become barren. The story of Hades and Persephone is one of the most well-known tales of Greek mythology and is generally regarded as an explanation for the cycle of the seasons. However, the Greeks believed the marriage of Hades and Persephone symbolized the relationship between life and death. In the ancient worldview, life and death were inseparable and existed in a cycle in which each relied upon the other. Dead matter nurtured life, providing necessary nutrients in the soil to make plants grow, linking the land of the dead and the return of a new life. Now, I'm always struck by the similarity of the death card in the tarot with the mythology of Pluto. So here we see the Lord of Death, a skeletal figure dressed in black armor, seated high on a pale horse and looking down at the mortals in the foreground. It's not very clear, but here are the mortals in the foreground. He has his right arm extended to receive whatever the bishop-like figure is offering to him. Here's the bishop figure. Rite of passage is that a gold coin must be offered, or else the deceased soul would be doomed to wander for eternity on the banks of the river Styx, which bordered the underworld. In the background, you can see that the sun is rising over the horizon, suggesting the new future. But of course, it's unseen by the mortals who are in the depths of their despair. Of course, the death card is rarely anything to do with physical death, but rather represents an important ending that will initiate change. Hades, Lord of Death, or Pluto then, represents the permanent end of a cycle. The old way is dead and it will never return as it was. It's accompanied by mourning, which is a necessary process before the new life emerges. Now, Pluto as an archetype represents the principle of transformation, power, and primordial instincts. It's associated with the mythical sacred bird, the phoenix, in that a new life is born from the ashes of the old. Hades or Pluto, then, is an image of the inevitable changes in life, which always contain endings and beginnings. And we must acknowledge that something has died at the same time as a new phase of life has been born. As I mentioned earlier, we are, of course, on the threshold of a new era as Pluto leaves Capricorn and enters Aquarius in March 2023. So we've seen what Pluto represents. So what does Aquarius stand for? Well, firstly, it's an air sign, so communication is a key factor. Aquarius is known as the most innovative, progressive, rebellious, and humanitarian sign. It's interested in radical social progress by means of the group effort, teamwork, and collaboration for the good of all. Its traditional ruler is Saturn, so it has to incorporate the principles of discipline, patience, responsibility, and maturity. Its modern-day ruler is Uranus, the planet of technology, innovation, revolution, and is associated with freedom, individuality, independence, and liberty. To think about what we might expect from the dawning of this new era of Pluto in Aquarius, I thought it might be helpful to look back and see what synchronized with Pluto in Aquarius before. Carl Jung, the Swiss psychiatrist and psychoanalyst, described synchronicity as the coming together of inner and outer events in a way that cannot be explained by cause and effect, but that is meaningful to the observer. In other words, the positions of the planets at a particular point in time may reflect events on Earth, but they don't cause it. They mirror or synchronize with it. Bearing in mind that this is a 248-year cycle, Pluto was last in Aquarius between 1778 and 1798, and before that between 1532 and 1553. So let's look at the earlier date first and see what kind of events synchronized with that era. In 1527, Henry VIII, King of England, requests an annulment of his marriage to Catherine of Aragon from the Pope in Berlin. The Pope refuses, and Henry rebels and is excommunicated from the Catholic Church. At the end of 1532, Anne tells Henry that she's pregnant, and Henry now knows that he has to marry Anne as soon as possible to ensure the child's legitimacy, even though it would effectively make him a bigamist. Just before dawn on the 25th of January, 1533, Henry marries Anne in secret in the presence of 4 or 5 witnesses who were also sworn to secrecy. Henry had decided that it should be kept secret until an Act of Parliament could be passed, breaking away from the authority of the Pope and Rome. In April 1533, the Act in Restraint of Appeals is passed, stating that spiritual and secular jurisdiction was to be the responsibility of the king, and the Pope's right of intervention was abolished. By December of that year, an order was issued that declared Henry head of the English Church and giving the Pope no more power in England than that of a bishop. All preachers were told that their parishioners must be left in no doubt that the king, and only the king, was head of the church. The Act of Supremacy was passed in 1534, declaring England as a sovereign state, with the king as supreme head of both the country and the church. All taxes formerly paid to Rome were now paid to the king. Apart from his 6 marriages, and despite his many other achievements, 500 years later, Henry is probably best known for the dissolution of the monasteries. In order to cancel out the power of the Catholic Church in England, he dissolved over 800 monasteries and transferred their wealth and lands to the crown. In 1539, he authorized the first Bible to be printed in English instead of Latin for public use. And he directed that all churches provide a copy of the Bible in a place where it could be read by all. In 1547, the English Book of Common Prayer is introduced, and religious imagery in churches is destroyed, in a further effort to make England a truly Protestant state and independent of the Pope and Rome. So here we see evidence of Pluto in Aquarius in Henry's attempts to break free and be independent of the ruling power, which at the time was seen to be the Catholic Church, Rome, and the Pope. If we take a quick peek at Henry's chart, it's fascinating to see that when Pluto is in the early degrees of Aquarius in the 1530s, it will have conjoined his Saturn and opposed his Mercury there. When this opposition was transited by Pluto, it's likely to have indicated that he would have brooded over his destiny and his inability to have a male heir. Note that Saturn is the ruler of his 5th house of children. And we cannot be surprised that he railed against the difficult circumstances that he found himself in, and which he must have felt were increasingly restrictive or rigid, and tried to find a practical solution. The next time Pluto was in Aquarius was the 20 years between 1778 and 1798. This was, of course, a very important time both in America and in Europe. In America, in 1776, Thomas Jefferson drafted the Declaration of Independence, which argued that the goals of the United States of America were life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The primary purpose of the Declaration was to proclaim to the world the reasons for seeking independence. This was signed by Congress on the 4th of July, 1776, and is generally regarded as the birthday of the United States. However, it wasn't until 17th of October, 1781, that the American War of Independence effectively ended, when the British Army surrendered and the British government was forced into negotiations to end the conflict. On the 3rd of September 1783, the Treaty of Paris, signed in Paris by representatives of King George III of Great Britain and representatives of the United States of America, formally ended the war, and America gained its military and legal independence. Then finally, the Constitution of the United States became effective with the swearing in of the first president, George Washington, on the 30th of April, 1789 in New York. And this represents the final stage in the formation of the USA, 13 years after the Declaration of Independence. We have two charts here. The one on the left is the Declaration of Independence in 1776, and the last is when George Washington was sworn in. In the first chart, you'll see that Pluto hasn't quite entered Aquarius, but is poised at the end of Capricorn. Nevertheless, the military defeat of the British, the subsequent Treaty of Paris, and the Constitution all became effective when Pluto had entered Aquarius. And by the time the Constitution became effective, Pluto was at 19 degrees of Aquarius, which just shows we must take care when interpreting event charts. The main reason is the difficulty in establishing the exact time and date that something commences, when there are often several dates to consider, as we've witnessed here. Meanwhile, in England, it was during the time of the reign of King George III. The American War, its political aftermath, and the death of two of his young children placed enormous strain upon the king, and he became intermittently incapacitated by mental illness. The cause of his illness at the time was unknown, but in the 1960s, it was considered that he probably suffered from porphyria, a rare hereditary disease marked by severe bouts of pain and mental instability. Recent research, however, believes that he may have been suffering from bipolar affective disorder, brought on by the stress he was under. Historically, and somewhat unkindly perhaps, King George III has since been known as Mad King George, who lost the British the American colonies. Meanwhile, in Bath, England, on the 30th of March, 1781, the German-born English astronomer William Herschel discovers Uranus. Herschel's discovery of a new planet was the first to be made in modern times, and also the first to be made by use of a telescope, which he'd built himself, and which allowed him to distinguish Uranus as a planet and not a star. This is the chart for the discovery of Uranus. And of course, we have Pluto in Aquarius, as expected. But there is a rather interesting T-square with Uranus Mars, and the Sun. No wonder its discovery synchronized with rebellions and revolutions. Incidentally, a pattern is repeated here too when Uranus enters Gemini in 2025. You see it's in Gemini now, in this chart. And it will have been 244 years since these two planets were in these same signs before. So Uranus must have been around the chart 3 times since then. Herschel, who was later knighted for his discovery, named the planet the Georgian planet in honor of King George III. However, it was later changed by German astronomer Johann Bode to Uranus, which eventually became accepted as its name. The planet Uranus is the 3rd largest planet, orbiting the Sun once every 84 years, and it's the only planet to spin perpendicular to its solar orbital plane. Also in Britain, in the late 18th century, a strong movement emerged to put an end to the buying and selling of human beings. The campaigners fought to abolish the slave trade by making it illegal and banning British ships from taking part. Those involved came together in 1787 to form the Society for Effecting the Abolition of the Slave Trade. Implicit in the Society's campaigning and propaganda was a critique of the values of British society and an appeal to the growing humanitarian values which were emerging. The continuing efforts and sacrifices of protesters illuminated the changing intellectual and social currents of the time and the move towards a fairer, more equal and just society. Even though the Abolition Society was formed in the 1780s with Pluto in Aquarius, the fight to end the slave trade was actually a long drawn-out battle. And even though there was very strong support to make this law much earlier, it wasn't until several decades later that the slavery abolition law was passed. In France, the storming of the Bastille prison in Paris on the 14th of July, 1789, is generally held to mark the beginning of the French Revolution and is the anniversary on which the revolution is commemorated. This was a world-shattering event caused by social and economic inequality, in which the French monarchy was overthrown, the king, Louis XVI, and Marie Antoinette were tried and executed, and a republic was established. This is the chart of the storming of the Bastille, and again, Pluto in Aquarius. But up here on the midheaven, you can see this triple conjunction of Uranus, Venus, and Jupiter, showing the urge for independence and freedom and the tensions and strains of which are suddenly released. It was 3 years later when the first French Republic was decreed at a National Assembly in Paris on the 21st of September, 1792. It's interesting that Mars is on the midheaven for the chart of the French Republic, giving the attainment of aims and goals through action. There's always also Chiron on the descendant here, square this Jupiter-Neptune conjunction, which shows strong idealism. And then there's an exact Uranus opposite Pluto in Aquarius, squaring Mars, showing the complete collapse of the old order and the formation of the new. But looking forward now, what can we hope for as Pluto starts its next 20-year journey through Aquarius? What I've tried to show is the kind of events that have synchronized with Pluto in Aquarius in the past. This is the chart for Pluto's ingress into Aquarius next year on the 23rd of March. And it's interesting that Pluto is right on the descendant here, with a conjunction of Sun and Mercury up here. So that seems to suggest that Pluto's energy might be best experienced through relationships and by negotiations, discussions, and compromise, and where listening as well as talking are paramount rather than fighting. It will be fascinating to see how events unfold next time, but the theme we have seen from the past seems to indicate fighting for freedom, equality, and liberty for the individual and the collective against the powers that be. For example, in the 16th century, Henry VIII was fighting against the power of the Church, the Pope, and Rome. In the 18th century, Americans were fighting for their liberty against Great Britain. The French people were fighting for social and economic equality against the privileges of the rich and powerful, leading to the downfall of their monarchy and the establishment of a republic with citizenship and rights. In addition, we saw the discovery of Uranus, which again synchronized with rebellions, revolutions, and the emergence of the rights of individuals, including the formation of a group whose aim was to abolish slavery and to liberate and free all men. Of course, Pluto in Aquarius is a generational configuration, the background to a certain period in time, the broad strokes on the canvas, if you like. And whilst we understand that no cycle operates in isolation, it provides a flavour of events with which it's likely to synchronize, rather than dominating that particular era. I'm not trying to suggest that history will repeat itself, but rather that Pluto in Aquarius will set the tone or backdrop of the big picture for the next 20 years. We've seen that Pluto makes its mark slowly. Transformation does not happen overnight, but that it represents new beginnings as well as endings. Aquarius, we know, is an air sign, and that means its modus operandi is through communication, information, intelligence, and understanding. We may then seek to change society through technology, science, and innovative ideas. Aquarius is a humanitarian sign and believes that social progress can be achieved by teamwork and collaboration for the good, not just of the individual, but for the good of all. Pluto's purpose in Aquarius, then, seems to be to root out, raise awareness, and expose what is unjust, unfair, and unequal in our society today, and then to stand up and do something about it. The headlines seem to be that on a mundane level, to synchronize with Pluto and Aquarius, there will be many protests against injustice, corruption, and prejudice, and that a stand or fight may be needed wherever there is oppression or inequality, but that eventually peace, liberty, freedom, and equality will prevail. It's often said that if you want to change the world, you have to start with yourself. On a personal level, if you have personal planets in the fixed signs of Aquarius, Leo, Taurus, and Scorpio, when Pluto transits these planets, then you may find that you are closing one door to open another, that you are completing a chapter, that you are having a parting of the ways, or you're putting the past behind you. It may feel that you are going through a transition, that you are eliminating what isn't necessary and concentrating on essentials. You may find that through conflict with another person, you have to fight for something, stand your ground, and develop your assertiveness. You may also find that you can transform your physical body through exercise and become more self-empowered by developing your willpower. In particular, with Pluto to the Sun, you're challenged to discover your own power and strength. Your sense of identity may change as you become more assertive and empowered to make some drastic changes. Pluto to the Moon brings intensity and passion to the feelings. You may find you experience some extremely strong emotions that you feel unprepared for. With Pluto transits to Mercury, communication takes on a new depth and you're impassioned by your ideas. You're interested in discovering the truth, what's behind the surface, and mentally explore what's been hidden, secret, or taboo. When Pluto transits Venus, you're seeking intensity and passion in your love life and will experience emotional extremes whilst you learn important lessons about love. Pluto to Mars transits affect your drive, stamina, and strength. Your ambition to succeed is very strong, and you will go to great lengths to achieve your goals. But aside from our personal issues, there is no doubt that we currently live in troubled times, and Pluto in Aquarius is set to shake the foundations of our social structures. Even so, this wonderful synchronous universe of ours is challenging us to implement a humanitarian agenda and progressive policies, and despite the obstacles that still lie ahead, to have the courage of our convictions as we move forward into uncharted territory, but build a better future for everyone. This is my hope for the next Pluto in Aquarius. Thank you.
And there may be some discussion.
Hello, thank you very much, Angela. I'm so wrapped in what you're telling us that I didn't know you finished even, you know. Have you finished? Thank you so much for all the research I know you've done in that, and I've learned so much from what you told me. I mean, these are things I think that we've all talked about, but not in such depth and detail, and that's what's so valuable about hearing you. Thank you very much indeed. Right, Wendy, how we are now.
Thank you, Angela.
We've got the Harvey Award, and Angela, you're going to play a major part in that, I think.
Oh yes, I better put my phone on again.
I don't know how we're going to do it actually.
So we've already worked it out.
But
no, it's fine. It's fine. So what we're going to do is, Roy, I'm going to share my screen, and I'm going to play the PowerPoints for you. Hold on a second, once I.
And while Wendy's getting that together, I'll just give you a little background for the people who don't know about the Harvey Award. The full name is the Charles Harvey Award for the exceptional service to astrology. And when Charles died, unfortunately far too young, in the year 2000, the board thought very long and hard as to how they could really recognise this incredible service he'd given, not only to the association, but to the faculty, to thank you. Shall I start again? Yeah. So
yes.
When Charles Harvey died in prematurely in the year 2000, a lot of thought on the AA board was given to the idea of how we could commemorate the amazing service he'd given not only to the association, but to the Urania Trust, to the Faculty of Astrological Studies, and to the Psychological Astrology Studies in Ms. Green's school, and many other local groups, and contacts even with André Babot in France to establish the Mundane Astrology book. So many things we could talk about Charles's achievements. And we thought this exceptional service to astrology was something we wish to encourage amongst everyone who works with astrology. And we will give an award every year. And the actual list of people who've gained this award has been quite remarkable. And even the people who haven't gained the award, been nominated, should have gained the award, really. It's been so remarkable how many people serve astrology so well. And so, Wendy, I think you have the Charles Harvey Award. We're not going to read the biography.
Well, no, but Roy, I'm just going to go through the PowerPoints, and if you could just say just a couple of words about each of them. I'm just going to.
Absolutely, yes, I will do that. If you could just, well, you can just scroll through and like, give me a chance to do that.
Yeah, I'm just
If you
having
want, I
a
might add
little.
a few points
I'm
to it.
having a little bit of problem with my PowerPoint. So you can see Sue here. If you just want to
Sue's,
say that.
I think a great friend of all of us, and we were incredibly sad to see her passing. But if she was to give this award, it would be the first person. Olivia Barclay was given the award some years ago, and her service to the association, to the faculty, her special work is all listed there. And we do encourage you to go online and read in detail what she said. Would you like to add something to that, Wendy?
No. And here, I mean, of course, all these three nominees, the AA board have worked closely with for many years. So it's and now we have Philip Graves.
Philip is an exceptional person who has, I hope, a great future with the association. He's recently taken care of, taking possession care of the Astrological Association library, which with his own library, which is slightly larger than ours. He's got this house in Newport, which is very accessible. It's right on the border of Wales, very accessible from London. Just about 2.5 hours to get to this library from London. And he's ever so knowledgeable and devoted his life to the care and distribution of knowledge of these books. And certainly this is a wonderful service to the community.
Thank you, Roy. And then,
well, if anybody's been to the astrology shop and seen how Barry just throws himself into everything he does there in London, those who have, I mean, everybody who comes to England interested in astrology will go to the astrology shop at some stage, but he's there for us all the time, and always a great servant to support astrology, to promote astrology, to be at the cutting edge of the front end of astrology. And he's been doing it for years, and I think we should be very grateful to him.
thank you, Roy. And now instead of opening an envelope, we have a new system, and I'm the only person apart from the auditor that checks the votes. I have just texted the winner to Angela. Nobody else knows who it is. So Angela?
The winner is Barry Street.
Hooray!
Well done, Barry.
Barry, I'm going to, I know that Barry's going to be. So Barry, I've made you co-host. You can now unmute and turn your video on.
Where is that Barry Street? Where is he? Oh, there he is.
So Barry, are you there? Where are you? Barry, here you go. Ask to unmute.
The street's there. We need the man.
I've asked him to unmute, and he's probably jumping up and down right now, I imagine. Oh, do you want to unmute? Oh, he's coming on, I think.
There we go.
Congratulations, Barry. I know.
What can I say? What can
Well done. You deserve it, Barry.
Can you The connection.
Barry's been a wonderful friend of the community for
The
decades.
youth of today, the youth of today, so believe in our craft that we have passed the ball on. We have thrown the knowledge on. The youngsters of today are so smart, they understand that we're not weirdos or freaks. I'm so honoured. I'm so crying. I really can't believe this award, but this award is that we've thrown the ball on. There are very, very smart astrologers in this world, and as long as there's an astrology shop
Yeah.
in the best city in the world, then our knowledge will be passed on. I cannot express to you my gratitude. I feel so honoured. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank
Thank
you,
you, Barry.
for all you've done to support people who come to the shop, and you've come to conference and got books to conference, and the many, many things you've done. We're very grateful for them.
Thank you, Barry. And I will be coming to your shop soon to deliver the award for you. So we'll have to
I'm
celebrate.
so grateful, so appreciative, but throw the ball on.
Thank you for being the interface between us and the public. Thank you, Barry.
Thank you. No, thank you. Thank you all.
Oh.
Okay. Right.
Thanks, Barry. Okay. So, well, that's the end of today. And we look forward to seeing you all tomorrow. Bright and early, well, 10 o'clock, I think. It's not too early. So it is for you in America, of course, not so much for those of you in Asia. So thank you all for joining us tonight. Thank you so much, Victor and Angela, for your wonderful talks, and Roy for opening the conference. And yeah, thanks all for being here. So I'm going to close the meeting down now, and I look forward to seeing you all tomorrow. Thank you, everyone. Thank you. And the video should be uploaded soon. I know that the webmaster right now was uploading. So if any of you want to go and see these amazing workshops, I didn't mention Will Morris's, which was incredible today. Wanda's is already up. The astronomy, Gemini Brett's, and Alexander's as well. So please go on and watch them if you have come in late. So thank you, everyone, and see you tomorrow. Bye. Well done, Barry. Well done.
I am so
Oh yeah, sorry,
incredibly
and the
grateful.
coffee shop.
So
The coffee
grateful.
shop. The coffee shop is open. The coffee shop is open. So yeah, Barry, if you want to come into the coffee shop, I can send you the link. Do you want me to email you the link, Barry? Come into the coffee shop. Okay, everyone, I'm closing this down, and we'll see